Okay, there. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, it is 11 and 12. And in fact, let me mark that down right now. Okay, so object elements of story worlds. This one is the easier one. It's basically the various things that you can have: props, stages, and actors. They should be called characters, I'm sorry. By the way, I will warn you that one of the problems that I will push on you is that my nomenclature has changed over the years. And so for many years I called them actors, but then I realized that for most people it's better to call them characters. The reason I called them actors, not characters, is that back in the days where we were programming closer to the iron, a character meant a single element of a string. And it still does, but back then everybody used it to mean that. Nowadays, that's not so common. So character is, in fact, the correct term to use. This is even more difficult with some of my personality traits. I've always been consistent with bad, good. Well, at one point it was nice, nasty, but now it's bad, good. And then there was faithless, honest, but now I think it's false, honest is the most recent version. And also the most recent is timid, dominant, but there was another phrasing back at one point. So anyway, don't be surprised if I use some weird wording that that doesn't make sense at first. So anyway, the one other point I will make about that is that it illustrates something very important, and that is that it is critical that we take into account that we utilize concepts from the world of real storytelling. That is, the best example of this is how space is handled. In games, it's obvious. We have X, Y coordinates, maybe Z coordinates as well, and we just specify the coordinates of an object or character or whatever, and that's all there is to it. No, 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 no. In drama, we don't have coordinates. We have stages, and stages work differently. A stage is one location. Everybody on that stage can interact with each other. Only people on that stage can interact with people on the stage. Moreover, characters really don't move between stages. Rather, they teleport. That is, character simply disappears from one stage and poof, reappears on another stage. That's how it's done in storytelling. And that's the way we have to do it. So just throw away all those concepts of X, Y coordinates and so forth. Instead, think in terms of stages and characters existing on stages. I'll give you the most extreme example of how stupid this can get. Many years ago, somebody was arguing with me about stages and stuff, and was saying, well, wait a minute, why can't you have a, whoops, Alex here, I didn't see that. There we go. Somebody said, well, if a guy wants to kiss a gal, then the guy has to walk up close enough to her to be able to kiss her. And, you know, I just couldn't help thinking how stupid that is. I mean, in stories, you don't get, you know, they just kiss. That's all there is to it. There's no physical positioning and careful alignment of lips with each other. They just do it. You know, this is drama, not physics. So anyway, we really do need to adopt the mental framework that goes into storytelling. which is stages, props, and characters. So, any questions about lesson 11 and the object components of story worlds? Oh, wait, yes, there's a question right here. Should characters be allowed to inhabit multiple stages to manage privacy? I'm downtown in the wrist. No, you don't need to nest stages. If you want to have an interaction just between people at a table, then that table is the stage. And there's really no point in saying, well, it's a stage inside of the restaurant stage, inside of this city block stage and so forth. That's getting into way too much complexity, quite unnecessary. There's just no issue there. Phone, what to do about phones? Phones are an interesting issue. They can be very useful as ways of transmitting information. However, my experience was that about the only way to really implement telephones is to have them have a very special case situation where when one person calls another person, the very first thing you do is that you move the two people to a stage called nowhere. By the way, this is important. Character number 0 should always be fate. Prop number 0 should always be nothing. Stage number 0 should always be nowhere. Because then you can apply special traits to them. For example, for telephone conversations, you simply move the characters to nowhere because you can't interact on nowhere, but you permit them to communicate directly with each other. However, you can only have vocal, speech verbs. So you can't kiss over the telephone or punch each other over the phone. You get into a lot of problems with telephones. In the end, I had them in one of my story worlds at some point, but in the end, I just decided it was too much of a mess and I threw it out. So again, my advice is don't do telephones until you've really gotten a lot of experience. Okay, yeah. George wants to know why you can't have stage nesting for all these special case things. Sure, George, if you want to make the world's most complicated story world that you'll never be able to finish, go right ahead. I mean, there are a million ways to make things more complicated. In fact, it's extremely difficult to make it simple enough to be manageable. So I'm going to be hitting you on this over and over and over because this was the lesson that kept getting hammered into me over years and years. I kept having to simplify things. And the hardest part is figuring out how much you can chip away and still have a viable story world. And even then, it'll be too complicated. You'll run into problems where it's just, you tear your hair out. How am I going to handle this? So I do have a strong recommendation. In fact, I'm writing up some additional lessons on this that I have not yet. You can actually find them. They're in there, but I haven't yet flagged them. But basically what I'm recommending is that you won't really appreciate this until you've tried it. And the best way to try it, the simplest possible story world that is in any way viable, is a statement of affinity story world. Basically the gossip game I did at Atari in 1983. Look at that. It's on an emulator somewhere on the web. Play that game, that simple statements of affinity, In fact, I will tell you, if you, let me jump ahead. First, here's a discussion of the modern version of gossip, which is a bit more complicated than, come on, Chris, there. A bit more complicated than the 1983 version. And let's see. That's odd. I thought I had stuck those. Oh, I haven't saved them yet. Never mind. There will be another one. In fact, I will upload it right now so that it'll be up there at least, and I can give you the URL to that later. But the statements of affinity are the simplest possible game, and you can start off with that, and then a way to add to that is with the with a deal-making structure, and I'm writing that up right now. So, oh, rats, the gossip link is broken. Oh, well. Okay, good. That has been uploaded, and now I can do this. And here we go. Here is the URL to the discussion of statements of affinity. And here is the URL to the discussion of deal making. However, I'll point out that the neither of these are actually really finished, which is why I have not flagged them yet. They need a lot more work. Oh shit! Thank you. Sorry. I don't notice when somebody needs to get in. So sorry, Lorenzo. Let's see. So any other questions about the object components of story worlds? Okay, let's now.
Hello.
Yeah. Let me go back here. There we go. There. Next is process elements of story worlds. And really, this is just about events. By the way, Lorenzo, how long did you have to wait before I finally noticed that you were waiting?
I don't know, 5 minutes, something like that.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I really have to pay more attention to that. Do you have characters have p bad good for objects? I don't understand the question, Mark.
That's okay. Never mind.
Like affinity for objects.
That answers my question.
I like wood objects. Mark likes stone objects. Something like that.
Yes, you can have that. In fact, in the deal making thing, I do talk about evaluations of props, and that, it turns out, gets into some really ugly issues. You can, of course, have individual valuations. That is, you have 20 props and 7 characters, and so you have a 7 by 20 array for how much each of the characters values each of the props. Yeah, that's the easy and simple way to do it. The problem is it's unplayable because no player knows how any other player values those props. I mean, the valuation is only significant in terms of deal making. That is, if you know, I really love my whetstone, and boy, I spend all day with my knife sharpening with my lovely whetstone, and I just love it so much. How are you supposed to know that? You know, and if you have a whetstone, boy, I'll pay lots of money for it, but you don't know that. And so you'll ask for much less than I'd be willing to pay. And there's no way for you to know. Unless you have a big complicated thing where people talk about, hey, you know, I really like whetstones. They're just the greatest things in the world. But that's a whole new sub-game. And for the most part, it's going to be boring. So you run into a problem with these valuations. I discuss it, and I haven't finished discussing it. I haven't finished writing up my discussion of it on the deal-making page. But this is one of the central problems with deal-making. So not much I can offer there. There is one way to make it all work, and that is to have fixed valuations. In effect, you have money and you have props. And a prop, by the way, money is a prop too. And there are problems with that because you can't just have a prop that says $23. The best you can do is have props for $1, $5, $10, $20, $50, $100. You can have a prop for each of those, but you're going to need lots and lots of those props. And then you have to have serial numbers for each of the props. That is, you know, they're going to be 20 or 30 $1 bills. And, you know, I'm going to have some, and you're going to have some, he's going to have some. And so you got to keep track of which person owns which dollar. And how do you label it then? I'm going to give you my $1 bill number 23. So again, it gets into, there are ways around this, but it gets a little messier than you'd like. But in such a situation, you can simply say, bicycle has a price tag on it, $71. Whetstone has a price tag on it, $4. And then you can just buy and sell things to people. That's not too hard to do. And so if you want to get into this, yes, you can have stuff. The real value of this kind of thing, though, comes when there are differential valuations. That is, when you can, in effect, you can make money by buying low and selling high. If all the prices are fixed, then there's no low, there's no high. So yeah, you could make an entire story world out of clever trading things, but then it really wouldn't be very much about drama. So anyway, let's see. How to handle event history. Okay, we're on lesson 12 now, events. How to handle event history. Is everything getting crunched into add good values, or is event memory required to make the characters seem alive? How to handle liars in this gossip circle around events. Okay, major issues here. Lots of technology here. A lot of solutions I can offer, some of which I really won't get into until later. But I'll at least outline them now. Event history, you can avoid keeping a history of things. I call it the dinosaur solution. That is, dinosaurs did not remember particular events. That is, the dinosaur does not go around saying, "Ooh, wow, the last time I went down to that lake, there was a big bad Tyrannosaurus hanging around there. I don't think I want to go to that lake again." No, they don't do that. What the whole idea of emotions really is a way of boiling experience down to simple parameters. In other words, the dinosaur doesn't remember the specific event, the time he was chased by the Tyrannosaurus at the lake. He just attaches fear to the lake. The lake is a frightening place, therefore I'm not going to go there. Similarly, the dinosaur discovers an interesting new plant that is very tasty. Well, he doesn't remember this plant is tasty. He just remembers, I like this plant. And so the basic emotions are really digested versions of history. They condense history down into the most simple terms. And that saves a lot of mental energy requirements. You don't have to recall a great many events and so forth. You just remember, I like this guy, I'm afraid of that guy, I like to beat up this guy, and so forth. That's what these emotions do. So, but for human beings, you need something a little more advanced. And so I have always had a data structure I call a history book. And the history book is simply a sequence of events. Basically, as each event is created, it is entered into the history book. Okay, page 351, new event, or event number 351. And then you simply record the event in the history book. However, this requires search methods if the history book is going to be of any use. That is, people have got to be able to look up and say, gee, the last time I made a deal with Mary, did she follow through? And so you'll need a variety of search algorithms that make it easy to look things up. I've done a number of these things, and well, I've always had history books, but the various search algorithms I've had, turns out I was always afraid that it would take too long to search the history book, but in practice, that did not turn out to be so serious a problem, because in practice, people don't generate, or story worlds don't generate tens of thousands of events. They tend to generate dozens or hundreds of events. Now, someday we'll get story worlds that are longer, and the history books will climb in size to a couple of thousand pages long, but by the time that happens, computers will be faster anyway, so we don't care.
So there's like a master book in these models you're making. It's not each character has their own book that they're consulting. They're consulting like a universal.
Yeah, there's a universal book, and what you have to do is attach for each event, you have a Boolean array for who knows about it. So when an event takes place, initially only the subject and the direct object know it, and any witnesses, that is, other people on the stage. But then you can have gossiping where people tell each other. That's a whole new thing, where people describe events they have witnessed to each other, or events that they have been told about. And you can get into all sorts of lovely complexities here, especially if you're going to permit lies. Now, again, I urge you, for when you're first getting started, don't have lies. It's going to get really nasty. Basically, everybody tells the truth, which means that whenever a character looks up an event in the history book, he can be confident that it is, in fact, a true event. However, you can build a story world around lies and make it a very interesting one. In fact, in a simple gossip story world, you can have a very simplified version of lies. The central algorithm that every character in a statement of affinity story world is going to rely on is expressed as people like people who like people they like. In other words, if I hate Mary and you hate Mary, then I can say, boy, that Mary, she really, I hate her. And you'll say, yeah, I like that. You're a good guy. So whereas if we both, let's say you like Tom, and I say, you know, that Tom, he's a stinker. I don't like that guy at all. Well, you're going to feel like, oh, really? Well, that's nice to know. You're not going to feel very good about me if I hate somebody you really like. So you create bonding by mirroring people's relationships back to them. The problem is you can't do this without in some way lying, because you'll tell one person, that Mary sucks. She's a real bad person. And then you tell another person, God, Mary is such a sweetie. She's so nice to everybody. And at some point, that has to come back and get you. And the way it happens is when this person talks to this person, and they say, well, Chris really hates Mary. And this one says, what? Chris told me that he likes Mary. So you got to have that kind of information transfer. So now we're talking about very indirect statements of affinity. That is, a regular statement of affinity takes the form subject like or feels about direct object some degree, positive or negative. So 4 words to the sentence. However, for this next level, you need subject tells direct object that third party told him that third party likes or dislikes fourth party to some degree. So now we're talking about something that it intrinsically takes 5 or 6 words to specify, and some of them are replicated, but that's getting a little messy. And I've done it. I mean, I did it with the gossip. You can see how it's done with the actually both versions of gossip. Even in 1983, I was able to come up with a way to make that happen. Let's see, and the 2013 version, I also have that. I'll caution you though, in many cases, look closely at the 2013 version, play it if you can. The user interface issues on these can get really complicated. That 2013 version of Gossip has an awful lot of subtle user interface tricks that actually I'm rather proud of, if I don't say so myself. But they are communicating these ideas can get, I mean, there's a lot of indirection here, and it can get rather confusing. So yeah, Joe says that Mary said that Fred said that, you know, it can get pretty wild. One big trick though, I'll warn you with, in these types of games, you gotta keep the character count way down. With Gossip 2013, I have a grand total of a maximum of 6 characters. And even then it can get very confusing. So in fact, that was the fatal flaw of that design. It was just too difficult to keep track of who said what about whom. So even though you were one of 6, so there were only 5 other people. And even then it was hard to remember who said what. So nasty issues here. Liars, oh boy. Yes, there are ways to handle, if you want to build in a lying system, a complete lying system about events. That is doable. However, my judgment was that it was best to handle it with a moving and collapsing, with a more complicated data structure that didn't record everything that everybody said at every time. Because I felt if you're going to have 500 events and 7 characters, then there are, you know, something like 3,000 possible statements of those events from all those characters. You're talking about an explosion here. And so I came up with another very clever little algorithm that basically set up temporary structures that expanded and contracted. These were actually useful for handling gossip. That is, gossip is not something where people just sort of rattle off everything they've witnessed. Gossip is prioritized, and here we get into the concept of verb import. Every verb you have to assign a dramatic import to. For example, taking out the garbage, that's a verb. That's going to have a very low dramatic import. Murdering someone has a high dramatic import, and you have to assign these dramatic import values. Then on top of that, you have to assign subjective amplifiers or modifiers to these intrinsic imports based on who did it and to whom it was done. In fact, I've got a really fun story to tell about this. For example, suppose there's an event where Tom does something to Mary, and I know that, but I'm wondering about whether I'm going to tell Jane about that event. Well, let's say the intrinsic verb import for this verb that was done, that Tom did to Mary, is 20. Well then, next I'll ask, well, Jane, I mean, does she really care about Tom? Does she know Tom? I mean, if she doesn't even know who Tom and Mary are, this has zero value import to her. So we're going to multiply the native verb import by the absolute value of Mary's P bad good or perception of the subject and the direct object. So yeah, if Mary really knows him well, then she'll want to know that. And if she doesn't know him at all, then she won't care. I developed this algorithm many, many years ago. And the first time I tried it, I was using an Arthurian game as my test bed. And it was fairly rich. It had a lot of good verbs in it. And in fact, at one point, I was, by the way, we call them rehearsals when we run test runs. Those are rehearsals, okay? Let's see. So I was running a rehearsal, and the story world was fairly well developed. And in this particular rehearsal, Lancelot and Guinevere had fallen in love, and in fact, they had sex. And I was so pleased. Wow, that just developed naturally. Other people would call that, what is it, emergent behavior. No, I planned for the possibility of that happening, but it required an awful lot of stuff to happen first. And sure enough, it happened. Okay, so Lancelot has just left Guinevere's bedroom, and he has this new event. Lancelot beds Guinevere. Now, the verb beds is going to have high intrinsic import. So Lancelot runs into Arthur, and he does his calculation. Let's see, high verb import beds. Arthur is married to Guinevere, so he cares a lot about Guinevere, and I'm his best friend, and so he cares a lot about me. So I multiply this by this. Very high import. Arthur, guess what? I just had sex with Guinevere. Oops. Sometimes algorithms don't quite work out the way you...
He's just a good friend, Chris. That's it. Yeah, I felt bad about it.
Yeah. So it turns out, and the really bad thing is, the solution to that problem is immensely complicated. It can be solved, but it involves recursion. basically you do a recursion thing where Lancelot puts himself in Arthur's shoes and carries out the calculations. If I were Arthur, how would I feel if I heard that Lancelot bedded Guinevere? And you calculate that, and then you come, and that kind of recursion, this can get really very tricky, very easy to get lost in that recursion. So anyway, this whole issue of gossip can get you into lots and lots of fun issues. Is it useful to think about fate acting like the plot-driven drama where the personality models are acting as character-driven drama? Yes, that's a very good question, and it is mostly true. Actually, the way to think about it is fate, you are fate. You, the story world creator. Fate is your avatar. Fate is the guy who's going to intervene to make sure things keep going on the right way. Now, the example I've always used for fate is the one about the villain and the hero sword fighting. Have I told you that one? Yeah. But really, fate, the primary task of fate is to keep the action moving. One of the problems you'll have in a lot of story worlds is that the action can die down and everyone's running around doing petty stuff of low verb import. Okay, I'll take out the garbage, you wash the dishes. They just go around and around and around doing all this little stuff. And all you have to do, remember verb imports, just keep running average of the verb imports of the last 20, 30 events. And if that running average falls too low, you say, all right, time for fate to come in. Let's pick out one of the guys and tell him that his little sister, somebody got her pregnant. That'll perk up the action. Or there are a million of these things you can throw in, and you should have a set of excitement generating events ready to just throw into the action to get things moving again. That's the greatest value of fate. So you can, that's what I've used fate mostly for. Fate can also be used occasionally for warning the player or advising the player. I actually used fate in my first C-Boot game. I handled most of fate through encounter systems. These were great fun, and I'll have a lot more to say about encounters later on, but I had a system where you could, as you were in the middle of playing the game, I was keeping track of a number of variables. I had a number of variables that represented the dramatic state of the situation. Various numbers that told me how things were going. And if a number went over an edge, got too high or too low, whatever, I could trigger a specific encounter. And the way the encounters worked, I was really, talk about dropping the fourth wall. Basically, this was in 1987, this game came out. Here you are playing this game with all this stuff, and all of a sudden, it just interrupts, and the screen goes to text, and it explains to you, Chris Crawford walks in and says, "What's the matter with you idiots? You're just sitting around talking about trivia and you're not doing anything really serious. You're here to be making deals, not doing idle chatter. Let's see. So let's do this again one more time with feeling this time. And then Chris Crawford walks out, and and then the player is given 3 responses he can possibly take. I think the first one was something like, "Oh, okay, I'll try harder." And the second one was, "Who is that person?" But then the third one would be something like, "Get the hell out of here, Crawford." And if you chose that option, then it would come back and say, "You hear dark rumbling on the horizon. The sun goes behind a cloud." And you don't know it, but I've rigged the thing to make it harder for you to win. That'll teach you. Don't mess with the game designer. So anyway, I had a million of those things. Some of them were warnings. When something was happening that was of extreme importance to the player, but the player didn't know, I had well, this is now kind of obsolete. Did any of you ever see the classic movie, The Wizard of Oz? There's a scene in that, I believe, where the Wicked Witch flies over and does some skywriting, you know, of Dorothy Beware or something like that. Well, I had a scene where if the player was about to lose and there was, you know, something he had to take immediate action, there'd be an encounter where Chris Crawford goes flying around trailing smoke, and he skywrites, "Danger, so-and-so is about to win," and so forth. So fate can be used for all of these things, and it is a really valuable thing. And I think it is fun to just present yourself as fate. Drop that fourth wall. It was hilarious fun in C-Boot, and everybody, all the feedback I got was very positive. Everybody agreed this made the game more fun, so feel free. So yes, fate is definitely a very useful actor for you. Oh, and by the way, fate also handles what I'll call, I don't know, third-party events, or events that take place outside, like weather. You don't say it's raining. You can't have a sentence structured like that. Every sentence, every event has to have a subject. And so the subject is fate. Fate makes it rain. And so whenever you want to just bring in, you know, you don't say there's an earthquake. You say fate triggers an earthquake. That's how you do that kind of thing. Let's see. Regarding inverse parsing, in your experience, how pliable is the player around expected grammar, i.e. John mega hits Joe yesterday? I don't understand the question. Can you expand on it, George?
If you're using like a pigeon grammar, like how far can you take that before people just go like, what are you even saying here? Like what?
Oh,
you know,
okay.
like is there like an understandability wall on syntax and grammar that you found, or it's like you just got to make it, if it feels like English, it'll feel like English for everybody?
I've never had a problem with that, largely because sentence structures tend to be very simple. The problem is, the weakness is you can't do nested clauses. Basically, you can have only one verb per sentence. Now, there are ways to do nesting, and I'm going to be writing a lesson on nested clauses, but in general, oh boy, there is a somewhat related problem in the use of language, but generally, since you're your basic sentence structure is subject does something to direct object, there's seldom a much problem with that. Of course, there are always additional objects. One of them would be an intensifier, as in Joe hits Mary, and then you had to say how hard he hits her. Or the most complex sentence structures I've used are deal structures. Joe offers a deal to Fred, in which Joe gives a bicycle and Fred gives the book. That's about the most complex data structure that I have routinely used. I have had a few rather complicated ones. And again, where it really gets messy is when you want to get into nested clauses. And there are ways of handling that. But, gee, I've never put explicit time markers into any of my sentence structures. There's no reason why we can't do that. Basically, I have, in the past, I've handled this with it's either present or past tense. So you see this happening now, or somebody tells you that it did happen in the past. If you wanted time markers, and I could see situations where they might be valuable, then yes, you could put them in, but now you're getting into some really messy stuff. How far back in time are you willing to go? How are you going to specify that? Joe did this 5 days ago, 10 days ago, versus 20 minutes ago or 6 hours ago. Now you even have to specify the units of time.
Time can be easy, like you want only 2 or 3 characters, you can have only 3 days. It's like a theater, closed time period, closed location, and a reduced number of characters.
This is, I'm going to make a note of this as something else I need to discuss. Whoops. This raises an issue that is particularly onerous. In the language that you used for your inverse parser, the most likely thing to use is text. Unfortunately, text has all sorts of semantic baggage that goes along with it. That is, it means things, it can have implications that you really don't want to carry along. And so one of my solutions that I have toyed with many times is the use of a symbolic language. I did this with the original C-boot. I did this with the modern C-boot. And that has the huge advantage that there's no semantic baggage attached to a symbol. That is, a symbol can mean, expresses affection, but it's not like saying, here's a good example. Let's take the verb love. That has so many different meanings. Grandfather loves the baby. John loves Mary, his wife. Jane loves Tom, her brother. They're just, there's so many different forms of love. And that one word can get you into so many, can have so many different meanings that it can confuse matters. And that's the advantage of using a symbolic language. The user doesn't present his own, or doesn't impose his own interpretations on them. The other big advantage is it's international. You don't have to worry about people learning English or French or whatever. Nevertheless, I feel that text is probably the best way to go for now. I had to jump through so many hoops to get the symbolic system working. that I think for now, let's just keep it simple and use plain old text. Even then, there's going to be a kind of a, there are going to be misinterpretations with the use of text.
Well, you can use a simple like interpretation of love. For example, you mentioned like love as a couple and love as a friendly relationship of a family relationship. And so you could categorize different love, you know?
Yes, here you get into an issue. You can either, I call it adverbiality. That is, do we talk about sexual love, romantic love, family love, friendly love? There are two ways to do this. One is to have an adverb attached to it. So Joe loves Mary sexually. Joe loves Tom friendlily. Joe loves his brother Tim family. That's one way to do it. In practice, though, I've tended more towards specific verbs. That is, there's one verb that says loves romantically, another verb that says loves sexually, another that says loves in a friendly way, loves in a family way, and so forth. This also another good example of this is kiss. There's so many different kinds of kisses, and I've experimented with both the adverbial way and the independent verb way. And again, I decided that the independent verb, having 6 versions of the verb kiss, worked out a little better.
You could have like conditions, like you can make rules for your story world. Like for example, for love, one of the rules is you can love sexually if it is reciprocal, and if the person in front of you is from your family, you can't love her with passion, but you can only like her.
Yep.
And so make like a concatenated. No, not. It's like if that's if.
Conditions.
Yeah, conditions.
And this, in fact, is the most powerful reason for using separate verbs rather than one verb with an adverbial modifier, because you simply cannot have family verb family love unless there's a family relationship to start with. So instead of saying, all right, we're going to use the verb love and then asking, can we use this adverb? We just say, can we do this verb with the family kind of love? Can we do this verb with the romantic kind of love? The calculations turn out to be easier to carry out. So normally modifying a verb is really only works as a matter of intensity. So like how hard do you hit, or how loudly do you complain, or how fervently do you request, and so forth. Again, there's that's another one. A whole class of verbs involving request, demand, so forth. I don't need to write that up too. So let's see. We're almost out of time. I'd like to give you an update on the multidimensional analysis idea. I've gotten a lot of good criticisms, and I have modified it quite a bit. Let me give you the URL for the latest draft. Here we go. This is the current this is the current proposal. And the question is, really, from my point of view, the big question, wait, I've got to check something here. Where is this? No, there was, oh, yes. The big question is what a fellow in the other section, Yvonne, has offered to do the web programming for this. And right now, the biggest question is he really willing to do all this coding? I can understand perfectly if he decides, hey, this is too messy. But, you know, we'll see. And George, I didn't have time to study your email that just came in. There it is. I now understand what you're talking about. I still have doubts about the triangular selection system. I still need, but now that I see what you're talking about, I will.
That like communicated the idea though better, doing it in pictures like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just need to contemplate it now. I glanced through it and said, "Oh, I get it now," but now I need to munch it over mentally.
Yeah, I just feel like the user, like at the end of this survey, needs to be able to take the characters and like play with them, and then in that little bit of play, go like, "Oh, I added to something much larger than myself," and that feeling is what gets
I
someone
agree.
to share it.
I agree.
Like, that is what we need to
see how I relate to the community.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yes.
That would be very powerful. I'm just not sure how to go about doing that. The real problem is I don't want to ask Yvonne to do that coding, the digestive, you know, calculating the results coding. I'm going to do that in Java, and my initial plan was he would dump out an XML file, and I would, or maybe a JSON, and then I would crunch it. But and then every now and then I would upload the latest results. But
yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I mean, you don't want it real time and just wasting power, burning coal.
Okay, well, any last questions? Okay, then. So next week we're on 13 and 14.
I actually have a quick question, Chris.
Sure.
On can you go over like emotions and mood from one of the previous lessons a little more? Specifically, yes. I was doing reading on like people that are so happy they cry or so sad they laugh. Or these like you know, there's so much of an emotion it spills over into another sort of like cuteness. I was focusing on like girls that think puppies are so cute they crush them. There's an aggression in the cute because there's like a cute overload, and was really fascinated with that whole thing going on there.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great topic to tackle in 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
Again, I mean, there are just so many ways. Stories are so complicated, and people are so complicated. Mm-hmm. So again, what we're dealing with, in fact, I think I have, let me see if I can find this here. One more. Here we go. I'm going to see if I can, no, I'll just see if I can pull this over. And now let me, there it is. Okay. Okay, here we go. I'm going to, here's an image that I would like to, has it shown up on your, Oh, you had to click to open it? Can you guys see that image yet? That's what we have to do with story worlds.
This was the ink brush cat.
Yep. That's the way you need to be thinking about stories. Not worrying about the details of the eyelids or the tail, but rather how can you reduce a story down to its real essence, the way this artist has done with a cat. And in fact, if you think about it, some of the greatest works of art are these beautiful condensations of, you know, complicated, intricate things down to an essence that captures what it truly is. And we have no choice but to be that elegant now, because I mean, basically all we have are these big fat brushes and rather grainy paper to paint on. So we have to do that. So it's kind of sad. It's like saying, well, sorry, you don't get to start with a tricycle. You have to start with a racing bicycle, and you just have to figure out how to balance it. So anyway, there you go. I will see you guys next week.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.